Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started now. I hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for joining us this morning. I hope you can see the screen. I hope you can see Inflationation there, death of the dollar, and I hope you can see my cursor flying around. So we'll go ahead and get started now. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I can't wait to do this in real time and real person. And we're real time right now, but we'll hopefully get people back downstairs. We're going to try that starting at the beginning of the year. So everybody be on the lookout for that. And we're going to record them. So even if you can't make it, you'll be able to at least listen to it. As always, there's some disclosures that we have. Just take a moment to read those if you can. Just want to let everybody know that we're not giving out legal or tax advice here right now. We're not giving out any financial advice right now. All that stuff is sort of personalized for you, not sort of, it is. And so basically we're just having an educational discussion today, and the topic obviously is inflation. So we're going to talk about today's agenda. And I don't know if you can see this coin or if you recognize that young lady there, but that's Queen Victoria, probably the most powerful woman that ever lived. And you may have noticed this is what we would call a sovereign, and that was the standard of the time for really 100 years. So we're going to talk about today's agenda, which is, basically what is inflation? It's a monetary phenomenon. We're going to talk a brief history of the dollar, although we're not going to go too deep into that. We've got a warning from FDR. There's warnings in history that are there if we look for them. So we just we want to point that one out. A lot of people don't understand how the Federal Reserve works, so we're going to try to clear that up for people and explain why we're having this inflationary phenomenon that we're currently experiencing. We're going to talk about inflation in America currently today and current trends with the way things are headed and some of the things that we could probably expect for the future. And I'm really excited to welcome a good friend of ours and a longtime client, Al Wolmer, who is a retired math professor, and he's going to talk to us about some of the math behind the inflation. So I'm going to talk about the macro perspective of inflation, how that works, and he's going to get right down into the numbers. So he's standing by, and once we get to that point, I'll introduce him again. So I'm really excited to have him along. So, a lot of people talk about inflation, and you see that there's inflation, but there's also rising prices, and they're really two different things. But to understand inflation, we really got to talk about what is money. So, what is money? I mean, I know we think about money in our pockets, and you got to remember that money, cash money, paper money has come and gone over the generations, over many generations. And we've been fortunate in this country that I don't remember the collapse of our currency. You don't remember the collapse of our currency. Your grandparents didn't remember the collapse of our currency. But what if you may remember that I'm married to a Brazilian woman, and in Brazil, they've had a collapse of their currency 8 times in like the last 4 or 5 decades. So I've been exposed to it, and it's not fun. But what is money? Now, this may be a very, very beautiful thing to you, but I can tell you there's a lot of people out there that are the gold naysayers that will say, well, gold that's a has-been, that's nothing, it's useless. Well, I'll be honest with you, gold is somewhat useless. I mean, it really is. Besides jewelry, there's not a whole lot you can do with it. I think there's some industrial uses, maybe in aerospace and that kind of thing. But here's the thing about gold and all the other heavy metals. You don't know this, but I wanted to be an astrophysicist before I even went to high school, before I even went to college. And one of the things I learned about gold and silver and platinum and all the heavier metals is that they're only created one place, and that is in the death of a star. A star goes supernova and explodes, and when that happens, neutrons, protons are crunched in together in a heavier and heavier elements, heavier than iron, and that's how gold is created. And our planet was coalesced from the remnants of another star that had exploded, and there were multiple heavier elements in that coalescence, in that gas. Gold, platinum, uranium, plutonium, all the natural elements that are heavier were created in the death of a star. And it can't just be any star. It's not a small star, it's not an extra large star. It has to sort of be the Goldilocks star. And Goldilocks, that gold is such a part of our or of our language even. So somewhere along the way, they got us to trade gold in for this. And I've seen some really, really beautiful money, paper money in my lifetime. The Netherlands used to have beautiful guilders that had flowers all over them, just gorgeous. So there's really beautiful money all over the place. But folks, it's paper. In the end, it's just paper. And we're going to talk about, I know a lot of people that will gladly trade their gold in for paper. But I'll show you here in a minute that paper is not created in the death throes of a star, and it's very easily created, and ink is very cheap. One of the greats in this business, J.P. Morgan, I take issue with him in some areas, but one thing I do agree with him in is, that gold is money. This is the way it used to be. Gold has always been money. Everything else is just credit. And I'm going to show you that. Even on our dollars right now, if you look at, basically that top line item right there is Federal Reserve note. Okay, well, it's a note, which is, if you look at notes, that's a debt. Somebody owes somebody else money, and this is the note that we're cashing in for that money. Well, why do we accept this note as money? Well, we do it because we have these legal tender laws, and we're forced to. I mean, that's basically why. And so the notes that are representative of debt are exchanged among us because we have faith in it. It's always been that way. It was that way for me. It was that way for my parents. It was that way for my grandparents. It was that way for my great-grandparents, right? So we've just always believed in it, and there's no real reason why, other than the fact that the government has the guns, and at the end of the day, they can just come and take everything. And here's Brookhaven. Here you are. But one of the things that Magellan is kind of known for, and I got into this probably about 15, maybe 20 years ago now, and it's changed everything. It made the difference for me, was the Austrian School of Economics. Most people don't realize that Keynesianism is the system that we're living under right now, and there is an alternative. I mean, there is an alternative, and it's called the Austrian system, or the Austrian economic system, and that was essentially, I would say, developed, but the father of that thinking would be Ludwig von Mises. And there's a great website that you can go to, mises.org, MISES.org, and sign up for their newsletter, and it'll give you some different perspectives on the things that are going on today, different perspectives. So we have gold money, we have gold standard, we have fractional money, and then we have fiat money. And there's very clear examples throughout history of where we have heights of empires and the collapse of certain empires, of almost every empire, once they start messing around with their money. If it was gold money, they would start shaving gold off and start adding in other things, some tin maybe, to devalue that. So it's been something that's been a problem forever and ever. As long as there's been money, there's been someone that's been trying to devalue that money. So let's talk about those different kinds of money and what they mean, because here's the most basic, right? I've got some gold, you got some food, and I'm going to give you some gold and you're going to give me some food. And the reason that we have money is because if we're all living in a village and one person is a potter and another person is a baker and another person's a farmer, and I can trade my pottery for your bread, I can trade my pottery for maybe your shoes or whatever else, but I really need a medium, something that's in the between that makes it easy, that everybody is convertible. And there's been all throughout history, POW camps and prisons today, even cigarettes are the medium of exchange. In World War I and the Bismarck Islands, the Germans learned that they could pay the natives in conch shells, and they would build a railroad or they would build an airstrip for them and paying them in shells. So it's just a medium of exchange. The reason the gold has been so popular for forever is because it's easily recognizable, it's easily divisible, and it's only created in the death throes of a star, which doesn't happen around here very often. We don't want that to happen around here again, trust me. So we have gold, that's very basic. And then along the way, we had the gold standard. Now, really, this started during the Crusades. So let's just say you're a nobleman from France, and you want to go off to Jerusalem for the Crusades, and you got to take some money with you, right? Well, you've got a lot of gold, and it's a risky place. That's a risky track through there. So you don't want to really take all your gold with you. So what you do is you go to the Templar commandery and you give them your gold, and then they give you a note, basically. It's written in a cipher, and then you take that note and you go all the way over to Antioch or Jerusalem, and you turn into the Templar commandery there your note, and it's deciphered there, and then they give you the gold back. And there's a little small service charge, of course, but that's how paper money really started. And it was very basic. Here's my paper. I'm trading that in for money. Now that's honest. That's an honest thing. You've got an equal amount of money, equal amount of dollars, equal amount of gold, equal amount of paper, right? But where it became sort of dishonest is when they started fractionalizing it. And this may have started with the Medicis, where they realized, hey, we've got gold here, and we've got these notes out there that is attached to this gold. But people are just using the notes. Nobody's coming to get their gold. So why don't we issue notes on the same gold? You could see that, right? Really easy to do that. So gold is heavy. Nobody's coming to get it, but they're used to these dollars. So they're used to the paper. So the paper works, and nobody needs to come get the gold. As long as they believe they can, they don't care to. That's the key, right? But then along the way, they said, well, nobody's coming to get the gold because everybody believes they can get the gold. So why don't we just replace the gold with other paper? And now there's no gold at all. So now we have paper backing up other paper. And that's what we call fiat money. And folks, that's where we are today. Now, once the gold is gone, right, there's really nothing holding us back from just creating more and more and more and more. And when governments get into power, it doesn't matter who it is, when you have control over the printing presses of the paper, and today it's just digital, it's even easier if you want to say that. But once someone has power to create that money, it is impossible to keep them in line. I mean, because generations go by, and maybe the first guy and a couple of guys do that, but after a while, you'll see it is impossible to keep that in line. That's why gold is needed. It's interesting here. Everybody's played Monopoly. This was my favorite games as a kid. But rule number 11 of the Monopoly game is, well, what if you run out of the money? Don't worry about that. The bank can never go bankrupt. This is the important thing. The bank never goes bankrupt. To continue playing, just use slips of paper to keep track of each other's banking transactions. That's what we're doing now. Or you can just issue some new money on slips of ordinary paper. The bank never runs out of money. And folks, that's where we are. We just issue more paper. Okay, so back in 1933, 1 ounce of gold, a U.S. coin, 1 ounce of gold, would cost roughly 20 of those pieces of paper. Okay, now, and I haven't checked it today, but it's closer to 2,000 pieces of paper. I don't know where gold is at, but we're closer to $1,800 an ounce of gold. So you guys see the links that I go at home to bring you these images. I had to go get all those dollars. Now, John Maynard Keynes probably said it the most, and this is the guy that the system that we're under, the Keynesian system. He wrote some books back in those days, and John Maynard Keynes, basically his thinking was this: we have these business cycles, and that's true, that happens, okay? And when the cycles go through a downturn, the government needs to kick in and spend money to bring the system back into equilibrium, okay? And then when the cycle comes back, then the government needs to stop spending that money, okay? That's his plan. But the problem is as you've probably already figured out, that once you start spending that money, you can't stop spending that money. What if I told you now that, okay, we're going to be stopping Medicare, that we're going to stop Medicare? You guys would freak out. What if I said, oh, you're going to stop Social Security? I couldn't stop the calls, right? Because that's just, that you just can't give and take it back. It doesn't work that way. And even in his latter years, he said that. He realized he was wrong. But he said, and he is right by this, the best way to destroy a capitalist system is to botch the currency. By continuing a process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens, and they have confiscated a good bit of it. If you want to look back, this is going back all the way to 1871. Okay, in 1871, a dollar was a dollar. And if you look at this, really, I've got my cursor here, I can show you, from here, 1871, all the way really to the Federal Reserve was created in 1914, right? We actually had maybe a little bit of deflation. That means when your dollar bought you more things, right? I mean, how bad would that be? If the price of stamps actually went down, how bad would that be? It wouldn't be bad. So Federal Reserve opens for business in 1914. Then all of a sudden we have World War I. Okay. Then next thing you know, we've got World War II coming up, and then Roosevelt takes us off the gold standard. And not only does he take us off the gold standard, he confiscates all the gold. I mean, it was law that you had to bring in your gold to the local Federal Reserve Bank, and they would give you, I think it was $35 an ounce or whatever it was, $35 an ounce for gold. It may have been less than that. Then in 1971, because of all the hyperinflation that we had spent during the Vietnam War, we had been pegged at $35 an ounce right there. And so what happened was that, the Europeans, mainly the French, were coming over here, buying our gold for $35 an ounce, shipping it back to France or Europe and selling it for roughly $70 an ounce. So Nixon, and I don't blame Nixon for this, he had to put a stop for that because we lost about half of our gold reserves during that period of time. I blame him for a lot of things, but not necessarily that. And then later on in 1982, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics just decided, this inflation is getting out of hand. It's too bad. We've got to change the way that we calculate inflation. So, I mean, you're not changing inflation. You're just changing the way you're calculating. You're basically now lying to me. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. But these are the guys, 7 guys here that met in secret in J.P. Morgan's hunting lodge down in Jekyll Island, Georgia. Many of you have heard of me talk about this. You may even heard me mention this book. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. He lays it out for you. You don't need to read the whole book. Just read the first maybe 5 or 6 chapters, and that'll really set you on fire. But these 7 guys met down there, and these 7 guys, believe it or not, were representative of 25% of the entire world's wealth. The entire world's wealth. Okay. They all have connections. Look them up. The interesting thing is, here's Senator Nelson Aldrich. He is J.D. Rockefeller's father-in-law. He's also a senator, and it's his name, the Aldrich Act, that they're trying to get through to create the first major Federal Reserve Bank. Paul Warburg here in the middle is an interesting character because his brother, Max Warburg, is exactly at the same time, they're Germans, at exactly the same time the Warburgs are setting up the central bank in the United States. His brother Max is over in Germany setting up the German central bank. 5 years later, just a few years later, we're at war with each other. And it wasn't but for these central banks that were able to escalate the war. And remember, that was World War I, the worst war that, that had been up until that time. The way we know a lot of the secrets that happened here was Frank Vanderlip here. Vanderlip later on in his life, I guess he recanted or was feeling guilty or something. So he, in his memoirs, sort of spilled the beans, so to speak. But these guys met down there in 1910, and I believe it was like in around 1912. Here was a newspaper article or cartoon about the coming money trust, which is, basically the Aldrich plan. If you look at the bottom there, at the time, it's called the Aldrich plan, but that didn't get through. So what they did was they changed the name to the Federal Reserve Act. And over Christmas, that was able to get through because they were able to sneak it through in December 23rd. A lot of Congress had gone home over Christmas. But you can see right here, it says, Walsh calls passage of bill a fine Christmas present, right? Wilson declares at first a series of constructive acts to aid business. I mean, has it really aided our businesses? I guess if deflation was a problem for you, then maybe. Here you can see Wilson with his good buddy. I don't know if you've heard of this guy before, but this guy, kind of looks like Putin, doesn't he? But this guy here, Colonel Mandel House, was basically Wilson's right-hand man. And later on, we see a letter here from FDR written to Colonel Mandel House. This was in 1933 when FDR was president. He's like, you know, the truth of the matter is, as you and I both know, financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. If you know the history behind Andrew Jackson, you know that he was fighting the Bank of, you know, the central banks is all throughout his life, an incredible supporter of free money. And so even Franklin says, you know, I'm not wholly accepting the administration of WW, which is, of course, Woodrow Wilson, which, you know, Colonel Mandel House basically was, you know, he was kind of the Dick Cheney behind that Woodrow Wilson. So the country's going through a repetition of Jackson's fight with the Bank of the United States, only on a far bigger and broader basis. And so, I mean, it's not making this up. There it is right there. When my grandma died, you know, I went through some of her stuff. You know, she was from the great, you know, the Depression, and so she kept everything. So I was able to actually see stamps that had been canceled from 1967 through 1977. And, you know, we started off with 5 cents. That's what basically would mail a letter in 1967. 10 years later, we were at 10 cents. So the act of, you know, mailing a letter hadn't changed. It was just the value of the currency had basically been cut in half in those 10-year period. And there you can see it right there visually. One thing that I really love talking about, and it's been 21 years, so I should probably shut up about it, but I can't, it was so funny to me. So Ben Bernanke, you remember, used to be the Fed's the president of the central bank and the Federal Reserve, and he was on 60 Minutes. This was back after, remember, we had the 2008 crash. And so the 2008 crash, they had to drop interest rates back down to zero, and then they had to do a lot of stimulus. Remember stimulus and quantitative easing and all that stuff, and TARP. So he went on 60 Minutes because there was, you know, a lot of questioning about this. And he's like, well, one of the things, you know, one myth that's out there is what we're doing is printing money. We're not printing money. What we're doing is lowering interest rates by buying Treasury securities. Buying Treasury securities. We're not printing money. We're buying Treasury securities. Okay. Well, I guess he forgot what he said about 18 months earlier, because on the same show, 18 months earlier, what he said was, to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, much more akin to printing money than to borrowing. But 18 months later, I guess people had forgotten about that, because, you know, we Americans have short attention spans and very short memories. But let's talk about what he means by buying Treasury securities. Okay, so this is part of the confusing part that I think is intentionally throwing people off, because we have these two entities. Now, when the framers of the Constitution got together and they came up with the United States of America, you know, they came up with the Supreme Court and the Congress and the Senate and the House of Representatives and the presidency and then the administration, the cabinet, and all that stuff. They also came up with the Treasury. That was part of it, always has been. But they never had the Fed. The Fed didn't come around until a couple of centuries later, right? And now we know why. But you've got the Treasury and you've got the Fed. And essentially, the Treasury creates these things called treasuries. And then the Fed creates these things called dollars. And then they just exchange them, okay? So the Fed is saying, no, what we're not creating dollars. We're not printing money. We're buying treasuries. Well, the next question should have been, well, how are you buying those treasuries? Where does that money come from? Well, he was honest there for a second. Yeah, we just make it up. So they're just made up, right? So they swap that. The Fed gets the treasuries. The dollars go to the Treasury. The Treasury basically spends those, you know, according to Congress and whatever they're doing. And then that's where you get your Social Security checks. That's where the Pentagon gets its money, Medicare, Medicaid. You know, we give out gifts to foreign countries, and then the public, you know, gets the rest. And there are some taxes and stuff that go into that. But as you've probably recognized over the past few years, there's been a shortfall. There's been a significant shortfall, and we've been spending a lot more money than we've been taking in through revenue. And what have we been doing? Well, like the Monopoly Rule 11 says, we just create some more dollars, you know. In fact, this is M1 chart. This is the monetary, all the money together, the money in your pocket, the money in your checking accounts, CDs, all those things. Okay, and so you can see that, you know, basically since 1955 there, I mean, we're kind of moving along. And oh, by the way, just so you know, this is thousands of billions. Okay, so we're talking 2 trillion, 4 trillion, trillions of dollars over here. We're not talking about, you know, 1,000 or whatever. So here we are moving along. The 2010 comes along. You better hold your breath, everybody, because this is the scariest chart I've ever seen. Look at that. That's just gone vertical. That's your money that you had to work for, you had to invest, you had to take risks for, you had to pay taxes on. And here it is. We went 4 trillion, 6 trillion, 8 trillion, 10 trillion, 12 trillion. We're already up at 20 trillion. And this is continues to go. Okay. So, you know, I've been complaining about inflation for the last, at least since 2010, because of this is going on. But now I'm telling you that it's now worse than ever. Are significant problems. One thing you might want to do just for the kick of it is just, you know, go to Shadowstats.com. This guy, his name is John Williams. He used to, I think he worked for the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, but remember I told you back in 1980 they changed it, or 81, they changed the formula for how they figure inflation. So if we go back to the old formula, the one that we used to use prior to 1981, the 80-based alternative, this is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics using their old numbers. You can see our actual level of inflation is around 13%. And I got to tell you, that comports much closer with what I'm finding in the grocery store and other places. So I don't have an answer absolutely right now, but you can see it's certainly a problem. And it's definitely one that's going to hurt savers and people who are conservative, people who are just sitting in cash and CDs and other cash-like investments. We can see that consumer costs have increased across the board. We've got agriculture, food and agriculture. Well, that's certainly true. I eat every day and I noticed that. Car prices may have gone down, but you can see the monthly payments have gone up. Heating and oil prices, those have certainly gone up. And then, you know, winter is right around the corner, so we're going to see how that goes. And then housing. I mean, if you go on online and check the price of your own house, you'll probably be surprised at how high it is right now. And of course, worst of all, movie tickets are through the roof, right? So people that are going to the movie, definitely, I remember going to the movie for $2.50, and you probably remember it was much lower. So so that's certainly become a much greater expense. But movies aren't more expensive. It's just the dollars are worth less. If you look around, you know, I live in Brookhaven. If you look around just in where you go, just do this now. I mean, start paying attention. You know, the prices have changed, or you'll see, you know, they've had to change the prices because, you know, price went up. Or these poor guys at one of my favorite sandwich deli shops, I mean, they got rid of the prices altogether. There used to be prices here, but they had to change them so frequently, they just got tired of it. So, you know, and you can see this is pretty old. Just get rid of those prices altogether. We don't, you know, it's just, you know, by the day, I guess it changes. And then the raising of prices or price changes, that's not the only way inflation occurs. You can also have the same price, but less product, right? That happens all the time. You can see that a lot of these bottles will sort of be hollowed out there, you know, or you'll see cereal boxes that are been designed differently. So inflation shows itself all over the place, and I don't say it's fun, but you know, look at it, it's everywhere. Once you notice it, start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere. This is as far as I know, this is the oldest gold coin that's been found. It was found off the Turkish coast, Bulgaria, by a diver, and it's believed to be the oldest coin that's ever discovered, 2,700 years old at least, maybe older. But here you have, you know, a gold coin. This gold coin today will buy the same amount of goods or commodities and services that it ever did 2,700 years ago. The problem with money, paper money, is, well, it's human. You know, it's built on the restriction of humans to not print it, and we just can't do it. We cannot do it, and that's the problem that's happening now in our country. So I'm going to leave it there because I don't have the answers, but our good buddy Al Wolmer does have the answers. And I'm going to shut myself up, and I'm going to turn it over to our good buddy Al. Al, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank Kevin for asking me to be a part of this. Just want to give you a little bit of my background. I'm an engineer by education, but I also taught mathematics in a second career for over 20 years. And teaching at the high school level, I taught a course in financial planning. And part of that was retirement planning. And essential to retirement planning is an understanding of and the impact of inflation. So what you're going to see right now is an extract from some of the courses that I've taught. Next. Okay, and next. Thank you, Kevin. Taking inflation into account when planning for retirement. What you're seeing here is a table that lists the prices of 6 things that I remember what they cost in 1968 when I graduated from college. Let's take a look at some of those. For example, a pound of chuck steak was 39 cents. Chuck steak was all that we could afford to eat anyway. I thought that that's what steak was. You know, you may have had to chew on it pretty good, but it tasted all right. Let's look at an entry-level BMW was $2,800. A starter house was $20,000. I remember my first apartment. The rent was $135 a month, and a movie ticket was $1.50. And I'm old enough to remember when I was really young that it was 30 cents to get into the movies. In 1968, when I graduated from college, I started as an engineer making $9,000. In 2018, the next column, 50 years later, look at what's happened to the prices. Pound of chuck steak was $5.99, an entry-level BMW was $35,000, and so on. What you're going to see, and the basis of what I taught, was that the price of something is not actually what the dollar amount is, but rather what it costs relative to your income and assets. So, for example, if you take a look at that entry-level BMW, $2,800, and now compare that to the engineer's starting salary, $9,000. How much of his initial salary or her initial salary does that car cost? It costs a little over 30%, let's say 31% in 1968. Now take a look at 2018. That BMW is now $35,000, but the engineer is making $70,000. So that car went from 31% of his salary to 50% of his salary. Take a look, and if we project those items forward to 2061, 40 years from now, projecting them forward at the same assumed inflation rate, that BMW is going to be $265,000. I know that sounds a little crazy, but then again, in 1968, if you had told me that a car would cost $35,000, I would have thought that was crazy as well. But what we need to do really is compare it to that engineer's salary. If we project the starting salary forward as well, we get $360,000. That entry-level BMW now is about 70%. So that car has gone from 31% of his salary to 50% of his salary to 70% of his salary. That's saying that that car is becoming more and more expensive. It's not the actual price, but it's the price relative to what you earn and what you have. Next, and next again. Let's look at overall inflation over the last 50 years. The high was, and again, you're going to see different numbers depending upon who you look at and how fine the gradation is, but the high was about 13.5% in 1980. The low was 0.8% in 2009. Mostly inflation was listed as being in the 2 to 3% range. Now, to have a good plan, you must know what your goal is. Our plan is to retire comfortably. After all, if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? Next. So let's say your goal is an annual income of $100,000 in today's dollars 40 years from now. That's a rather convoluted sentence, but in my courses, I would ask my students, how much do you think you would need to live on today to live comfortably? So for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to say $100,000. What's that going to be in 40 years? Next, and next again. So most of us here, or many of us here, are retired. Let's assume for this exercise that you're a couple with combined Social Security income of $50,000. Next. Now, Social Security has a COLA. I don't mean Coke. I mean a cost of living adjustment. And we should take that into account. Next. Let's assume an average 2% COLA and project that forward for 40 years. If we do, and there's the math that Kevin was referring to earlier, If we take $50,000 and multiply by 1.02 to the 40th power, we get $110,000. Next. Wow, we're all set, right? I mean, we said we needed $100,000 and Social Security is going to be giving us $110,000 in 40 years. We're all set, right? Sadly, no. Next. And there we go. What does that total goal of $100,000 in income become in 40 years? For that, let's assume an inflation rate, and let's use 3%. Using the same mathematical structure, that 100,000 times 1.03 to the 40th becomes $326,000. Next. So subtract what Social Security will give you, and you have the amount that you need to supplement your income. Next. 326 minus 110, $216,000. Next. $216,000. That's what that exclamation mark means. Yell it. So that means in order to have a lifestyle in 40 years, supported by an income that $100,000 in today's dollars would buy, you'll need, after Social Security, an additional annual income of $216,000. Next. Where is that going to come from? Well, you're going to save and invest for the next 40 years to accumulate enough capital to generate that required income. Next. And just how much is that going to be? Next. In 40 years, you'll need to have $216,000 of income. Next. How much do you need to do that? Well, it depends on a number of things, including your investment earnings rate over the 40 years, as well as your withdrawal rate. Next. No one can predict the future, but a rough estimate is between about $3.5 million and $5.5 million. That's what you need to accumulate, somewhere between $3.5 million and $5.5 million. And that's just an estimate based upon those inflation rates that I postulated earlier. If inflation is higher, you're going to need much more than that. Next, what is it going to take to get there? Nobody can predict the future, but it looks like it would be somewhere between, say, $15,000 and $35,000 per year over 40 years. Next, it takes discipline to do that, but it's worth it because that's the only way you're going to get to this goal. And nobody's responsible for getting to this goal except you. It's worth it because whether you're rich or poor, it's nice to have money. Kevin, I'm going to turn it back to you now.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that, Al. Very good. Very good. That puts it in perspective for us. So as you know, we are concerned about inflation. We're doing the best that we can around here, but we're limited because we are stuck in dollars. I mean, we're buying stocks and bonds in dollars. Everything is in dollars. So until there's another alternative, and I guess there are some of those floating around, we're really kind of stuck with our dollars, and we have to do the best that we can with what we've got. So I want to stop it there and thank you all very, very much. If there are any questions, please email me and I'll be happy to email those back to you. We have compliance issues. We're going to put this up on YouTube and stuff like that, so they don't like the questions when I answer them, honestly. So thank you all very much again, and hope you have a very happy week and month, and also happy Thanksgiving. Hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.